confirm?
No, I will. I have the slides from the end, so I can. I will ask you if you could please move to the next slide whenever I finish talking about one slide, and I have a slide open on my end too.
Okay, good. So I mean, for the other colleagues, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is well. Thank you for joining. I mean, to this second session, okay, that we have here with our colleague Heba Kolif, which I'll let her present herself as well as Glay. But I just wanted to say hi to everyone. It's really, I mean, DCO has been looking forward into the set of training for webinars that we've been set up, and it's on every Friday. So I mean, we're having. Sorry, let me go back. Something happened with the slides. Sorry for that. Oh, this what happened here? Let me just go back. There, yeah, slideshow. Apologies for that. Okay, good. So basically, today's session is based on HR, the recruitment practices, and we have, as I was saying before, we have our colleagues Heba, colleagues, and Clay Appleton, who's going to take us over. I mean, through the webinar on inclusive recruitment practice, basically to support us in our processes at our agencies and our offices. So you should be seeing my presentation. So, I mean, not my presentation, Heba's presentation. I'm presenting the slide for her, but it's basically her presentation. And basically I will be here to support her, to support Gleb, to support the team. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them down in the chat box, and I'll be able then to share them with Heba as we go towards the whole session, which is going to be an hour and a half. For those who do not know me, my name is Karin Lopez. I'm the Regional Admin and VAS Coordinator for the LAC region, Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm here, well, very happy to be part of this team and, of course, supporting him in this webinar. So over to you, Heba. By the way, I'm already presenting the objectives outline slide for you to know.
Thank you very much, Karin. It's a pleasure to have you in with us on this webinar. Thank you very much for your time and for supporting us in order to deliver this webinar. Let me first introduce myself. I hope you can see me in the camera. I'm a person with visual impairment. I'm based in Alexandria, Egypt. I have a master's degree from the University of Birmingham, United Kingdom, in inclusive education in developing countries, management of inclusive education in developing countries. I have been working in the field of disability inclusion, especially on the field of digital accessibility for more than 20 years in organizations, national and international organizations in and outside Egypt. I'm very passionate about accessibility in general, and I'm very happy to be with you here today. So, of course, we're also very delighted to have Mr. Clay Appleton, Program Management Officer and Common Premises Coordinator for the Africa region. And he will, of course, tell us more about himself and about his journey in the labor market and especially in the UN system, and how inclusive recruitment practices helped him to advance and have the opportunities that he deserves inside the UN system. So by the end of this webinar, we will be able to learn more about inclusive recruitment. We will learn about disability employment facts regarding disability employment, and we will also have an overview about the opportunities or enablers and also the risks and challenges that could impede inclusive recruitment into any organization, and especially the UN system. We also will discuss the challenges that both employers and employee face in order to implement inclusive recruitment practices. And we will end our presentation with discussing some practical solutions and some interviewing tips that agencies could, or that hiring panels and interviewing panels could implement in order to achieve inclusive recruitment. So without further ado, let's move to the next slide, please. And this next slide, I want you to flash back a little bit to when you were a young child, and imagine yourself being a young child again, which is always a good thing. And you're riding in the back of the car with your siblings, while your parents are riding in the front of the car. So this is um, one vehicle, one experience, but each of you is experiencing this experience differently, because your parents in the front of the car have a room, have a space to stretch their legs and to sit comfortably, while you're in the back of the car having to fight over a very little space, especially or if you're sitting in the middle chair, you cannot find any place for your knees or your legs, and it's a little bit uncomfortable down there. So workplace is just like this small car. If this workplace wasn't inclusive enough, wasn't spacious enough, some employees might feel a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit restricted if their accommodations and requirements, if their needs are not accommodated for. So that's why it is very important to understand the fact that although there could be one environment, each of us will experience this environment totally different. Next slide, please. So inclusive recruitment is just to make sure that all the groups in the diverse workforce that we are having is accommodated for and is able to function as independent and efficient as possible. We're giving support to all the diverse groups within our working force. So, like we have measures, for example, to achieve gender equity within the workplace. So similarly, we have to ensure that persons with disabilities have the same inclusive recruitment practices that would enable them to perform and to thrive in the workplace. Next slide, please. So there is some facts relating to the disability employment and employing people with disabilities is that 80 to 90% of people with disabilities are in working age, and their employment rates are nowhere near the employment rates of persons without disabilities. That's according to the statistics made by ILO, or International Labour Organization. So according to the ILO, if the employment of persons with disabilities as a group could be raised to the level of employment of persons without disabilities, then economies could benefit in increase from between 3 to 7% increase of GDP. So it's very important for all agencies to ensure their workplaces are inclusive, disability inclusive. Also, this is a central, the 2030 agenda plays a significant, places a significant importance on the issue of employment for persons with disabilities. The explicit reference of persons with disabilities in the SDG target 8.5 need to be reflected on all the employment practices that we are applying in our agencies and employment policies as well. Next slide, please. So these are some of the facts that I could gather. Persons with disabilities are likely to screen themselves out of applying for job vacancies if they do not meet 100% of the job requirements. The same goes also for women. So because of this, job recruiters need to have another look of the criteria and the job competencies they are including in their job advertisements. Maybe they need to divide these job competencies into a must-have criteria and a nice-to-have criteria, or a primary and a secondary job competencies, so that persons with disabilities will focus more on the primary job competencies and criteria, and this might give a little bit more opportunity and more room for and encourage persons with disabilities to apply. Next slide, please. So this is the text of the article of the CRPD, Article 27, that tackles the issue of employment for persons with disabilities. And as we can see, this article stresses on the fact, on the idea that states and state parties should recognize the right of persons with disabilities to work, and should ensure that workplaces have the necessary reasonable accommodations in place, and have the necessary budgets and mechanisms to develop a reasonable accommodation plan and implement this plan, and to ensure that persons with disabilities are accommodated for inside the work environment. Of course, and also workplaces should not discriminate hiring persons with disabilities on the basis of disability, or cannot practice ableism, which is discriminating on the basis of disability. Next slide, please. This is also rest of the text included in the Article 27 of the CRPD. And of course, we will be sharing the slide with you for your reference, so you can have a thorough and look at the text of this article. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of diverse or inclusive recruitment? There are benefits for the employers, and there are benefits for the employees. So for the employer is going to have increased innovation, increased productivity, increased visibility and outreach, and flexible service delivery modes, and broader perceptions of the beneficiaries that they serve, and increased a range of knowledge and expertise within the agencies, and also they would have the ability to mirror the demographics of the community being served, meaning that if we have an organization that provide services for the development, especially in the development field, to people in a certain area, it is important to have people who are working in the agency which mirrors the demographic structure in this area, in order to be able to deliver their services accommodating for all categories of beneficiaries, including persons with disabilities. And persons with disabilities are very resilient kind of employees. They are very creative because they learned all their life how to navigate and move into inaccessible environment, and trying to find out of the box solutions to everyday problems and challenges. So whenever employers are looking for potential hires, they look for this concept. They look for creative employees who can find innovative solutions for everyday problems. Also, because persons with disabilities are very resilient, they do not stop until the problem that they are facing, or the challenge that they are facing, is solved, or they can overcome it. So this is an excellent trait in any person working in any agency: resilience. Also, persons with disabilities, when they work in any organization, they have a loyalty to this place, which gave them the opportunity and the room to be themselves, and to bring all of themselves into the work that they are doing. So we would find decreased rates of turnovers from persons with disabilities when they are hired in any agency. And of course, this will positively impact or be another factor in order to achieve cost efficiency. Because if you are having higher rates, higher turnover rates, you will have to start re-advertising, recruiting, and selection processes again, which costs both time and money. Um, Next slide, please. So there are some challenges which impedes and hurdles the process of inclusive recruitment. And of course, the challenges are also for employers and for employees. So for employers, next slide, please. For the employer, we can find that some employers say that they cannot find a pipeline of talented persons with disabilities or qualified applicants from persons with disabilities. Uh, some countries that we have been working with in the seed funding pilot project country teams in disability inclusion, when they want to hire a consultant with a disability to assess their physical or digital premises of their UN house, they re-advertise for this post maybe twice or three times because they cannot find a qualified candidate. The solution for this we will discuss later on in the recommendation section. Um, Another challenge is the lack of knowledge about accommodations and the perceived notion that reasonable accommodations are very costly and very expensive and very hard, difficult to procure, which is, of course, not true. First, everything costs money. So when, for example, we were advocating for women empowerment, and we were advocating for agencies to provide nursing mothers with lactation rooms, this, of course, costed money. If we also want to implement anything in our agency, uh, um, uh, add anything new, it will cost money as well. So everything we do, everything in the operationalization or running of the agency will cost money. So the same goes for reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities. So why should we just focus on the fact that reasonable accommodation costs money? And not all reasonable accommodation costs money, because sometimes the reasonable accommodation could be just provide flexible working schedule or flexible working modality, or maybe change the seating and lighting position of a room, or maybe providing a computer or installing a free screen reader on the computers in order for people with visual impairment to be able to use this computer. So not all the solutions are costly and expensive. Next slide, please. So for the job candidates, there are a number of challenges as well. For example, if the workplace itself is inaccessible in terms of the digital or the physical environment, and if the application or the job announcements are inaccessible, for example, for me, when I was applying to DCO, I had to go through the consultant roster, which is all the consultants have to put their data in, and it was completely inaccessible. So my colleagues at DCO provided an excellent support because they provided an assistance. So I had a colleague who would help me, who would have an online team meeting with me, and he would take control of my screen, and he would help me apply all the documents into the consultant roster and make sure that I filled in all the data required for me to enter my information and create a profile there. So this very simple but very significant accommodation enabled me to access something which I would otherwise be unable to access without this support. So it's very important to either to ensure the accessibility of the job announcements platform, or to provide another alternative form of support for persons with disabilities to enable them to apply. Uh, Persons with disabilities are always afraid that they would be dismissed when they apply for any job vacancy on the basis of social stigma and attitudinal barriers. So, because of this fear, they do not apply to jobs. So, it is very important to have this statement that encourages people with disabilities to apply in order to help in encouraging them to overcome this fear. So in some countries, unfortunately, and there are inequitable education for persons with disabilities, or the inclusive education journey is still in its prime. So we would find, for example, that persons with hearing impairments, we have high literacy rates among persons with hearing impairments or persons with cognitive impairments. We would find that persons with visual impairments are only allowed to enter to study specific regions specific measures. Excuse me. Specific measures. They are not allowed. They are restricted from participating in some fields of knowledge. So it affects their qualifications. So inequitable education really affects the opportunities of persons with disabilities finding equitable employment. Um, and of course, when persons with disability experience higher levels of unemployment, this will decrease their chances to gain the experiences that would later help them to secure a good and um, job opportunity, because they lack the necessary experience in order to join this or to be hired in this job. So because they have higher employment rates, then this creates a lack of experience. This lack of experience then result in them even be more unemployed. So in order to break this circle, we have to ensure that to employ persons with disabilities in our uh, job vacancies, even on internship basis, in order to give them the experience that they need to advance and to be promoted later on. Some people are afraid to disclose their disability, especially if they have an invisible disability, or especially people who are neurodiverse, because they think differently, they process information differently, they might exhibit outwardly involuntary behaviors like facial expressions or involuntary body movements or anything like this. So they are sometimes afraid to disclose this information in case it will negatively uh, affect their opportunity to be hired in this job. People will think they are incapable of doing the job, so they are afraid of disclosing their disability, so they don't apply. Next slide, please. However, there is still, of course, a good amount of hope available because there are a lot of enablers and opportunities for agencies to practice inclusive recruitment. First of all, uh, these diverse talents of people with disabilities are likely to be an excellent candidates for different jobs. So when the organizations have a pipeline of persons with disabilities, they can, of course, find suitable candidates among these diverse talents. Also, the social media networking platform play a vital role in delivering the message that a certain agency is hiring, and this agency is an equal opportunity employer. And by social media networking, I mean that we have to follow the twin track approach, which is encouraged by the UNDIS when we are developing and implementing any activity targeting the promotion of the inclusion of persons with disabilities, is to make sure that this activity that disability inclusion is mainstreamed into the mainstream activity, meaning that we can always ensure that our mainstream job advertisements are inclusive. And also we can develop specifically targeted activities, specifically targeting persons with disability. There are certain social media platforms which is made by persons with disabilities for persons with disabilities. So agencies can just make a list of these social media platforms and specifically publish or share their job vacancies in these platforms. On Facebook, there are a lot of groups that are actually made by persons with disabilities, and they are very useful for finding qualified talents, and LinkedIn as well. Um, so database sourcing is another mechanism that agencies can implement in order to ensure that they have a pool of talents from persons with disabilities. They can network with OPDs, but they have to bear in mind that these OPDs have to be as diverse as possible, because disability is not persons with disabilities are not a homogeneous group. They are a diverse group with unique needs and requirements. So when they are collaborating with OPDs, they have to ensure that these OPDs have a diverse nature, so that they can have a diverse pool of talents from persons with disabilities. Employer referrals could be also a good mechanism for acquiring qualified talents. They can look at, of course, consultant rosters and databases. So maybe they can find information about persons with disabilities that were recruited before by other agencies. They can, of course, depend on called out outbound outreach sourcing, like phone calls or emails. And there are a lot of specialized sourcing software available online that they can use to look for qualified talents as well. Headhunting could be another way of searching for qualified talents. And they have to make sure that their advertisements are accessible in order to attract qualified talents to apply. And the last thing I want to talk about is they can, of course, do an internship programs for persons with disabilities to have a lot of to collect data of qualified candidates from persons with disabilities. And the UNV has made a very significant steps in that regard, hiring a lot of persons with disabilities throughout the UN agencies. Organizing career fairs could be also another way of attracting qualified talents, and they can collaborate in these inclusive career fairs with the OPDs. They can also organize specialized orientation job fairs targeting only persons with disabilities in collaboration with OPDs as well.
Heba,
So
we have
before,
oops, sorry
yes,
to interrupt you. We have a question in the chat box. So do you want me to read it now, or do you want to wait until the end of the session?
No, yes, please. I was just going to ask if anyone have any questions.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, so we have a question. Is there any particular job websites for persons with disability or OPDs that disseminate the vacancies?
I'm actually unaware of a website that is dedicated to announce jobs for persons with disabilities, but there are special social media pages on Facebook, for instance, and special LinkedIn groups that are dedicated to disability inclusive, finding disability inclusive, that can help in the disability inclusion recruitment process. And also, if you go to LinkedIn and you could follow some influencers on LinkedIn, they can link you up with other persons with disabilities. because when you are following, for instance, a digital accessibility consultant on LinkedIn, you can find on his or her page other people who also share the same interest. So this could be your way in order to find qualified talents through LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Sorry. Okay, here there's Pablo Orozco mentioning that in Latin America, okay, they have the platform incluyeme.com. So I don't know if you're aware of that platform, Heba, but this was shared by a colleague in Paola, sorry, Orozco, shared in LAC.
Yeah, thank you very much for this information. I'm sure this would be very helpful, and I can of course search if there are similar initiatives in other regions, and I will be sharing with you any of these platforms when I find them.
Okay, there's also a
Yeah.
comment. Sorry, there's also a comment from Ingrid Lopez mentioning that UNOPS has a partnership with them. I mean, with the incluyeme, sorry, .com platform. I mean, just reading what's in the chat.
Thank you very much, Karin. Thank you very much for sharing this very important information, and I'm sure that other colleagues will find it very useful too. So next slide, please. So now we are going to talk about our recruitment phases very quickly. We are not going to discuss each of them, but you can look at the slide that has the different recruitment phases. We will discuss them in details later on. They start by the job posting and announcement, then the job applications processes, then interviewing, contracting processes, onboarding, training, retention and promotion, because the hiring a person with a disability is not the end of the journey. It's rather the beginning of the journey, because this person need to feel that they have an opportunity to thrive and to be promoted and to retain their job, because applying for jobs is not a very easy task to do, especially for persons with disabilities having to fill in applications and submit the applications, and they will be anxious whether they are going to be accepted or rejected. The fear of rejection is a very big and important factor. So it's important to make persons with disabilities able to retain their job. And next slide, please. So here we're talking about job announcements, and we have to make sure that the job announcement itself is accessible and is published on an accessible website. Not only the announcement itself is accessible, but they are published on accessible websites, as I said. And make sure that the announcement contains the statement that persons with disabilities are encouraged to apply, and the agency is committed to provide reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, not only after hiring, but also through the recruitment and interview processes. And of course, there are a lot of agencies that already have these statements in their job announcement, of course. You can specify an alternative method in case your job application is not accessible. And it's important to assign an accessibility contact focal person, just as the case with me when I was hired in TCO. There was a focal person that I could contact when I could not find when I could not access the consultant roster and I could not submit my application. You can share, of course, salary ranges to ensure and to show your commitment and transparency, and that persons with disabilities will be sure that you will provide them with fair pay, and that they will have an equal pay to persons without disabilities. Having benefits information on your job announcement is a key factor as well, because persons with disabilities might be experiencing some health conditions. So they want to make sure that they will be entitled to sick leaves and well-being leaves as well within your organization. Next slide, please. So before going to the interview process, because this is really very important, not only to look at the theoretical aspect of how to conduct an inclusive interview, let me give the floor to Mr. Glay Appleton to tell us more about the interviewing process, how the inclusive interviewing process and selection processes would help in providing more inclusive opportunities for persons with disabilities, and also he will be sharing with us some of his life experience and work experience as a person with a speech impairment. The floor is yours, Mr. Gray.
Thank you very much, Heba. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Claire Houston Appleton, and I'm the Program Management Officer for the back office and Mrs. With DCO, and I'm based in Addis. I have been asked to come to this session to share with you my own experience as a person with this with a form of disability. Now, before I go further, I just have a few questions to ask you quickly, because that will help us set the context. Okay, so just quickly, for a minute or two, I will not be seeing the screen, so I will not know who has his hands up or who has typed something. So I just need to.
Glay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'll help you
Yeah.
with that. I'm following the chat, and I'll let
Yeah.
you know if there's anybody raising their hand for questions. So sorry for interrupting.
Exactly. Thank you, Karin. Colleagues, I have these three questions that I just want you to think about briefly. Now, just think about you being on a panel and you have seen that the interviewee has entered and this person has a hearing impairment and you did not know, but there is no language, sign in interpreter in the room. There is none. What would you do? And then also imagine a situation where a person that has what is called obsessive compulsory disorder, where without any control, a certain part of the person's body will start moving. So this person has entered, the interview has started, and you start observing noticeable movements in parts of the person's body or on parts of the person's body. What do you do? Or at the third one, and then I will pause and see what your responses would be. Is that you ask the first question and without any prior information, this person is like myself, as with stupor, and a person is stuttering severely severe stuttering experience starts with extremely slow speech, or even the person is unable to complete a sentence or to pronounce key words that you are listening to, because every interview is stressful and it is targeted at specific insights. So this person is struggling. So in just a minute, you can raise your hands or you can type in the chat. What would you do? And then if you like, say, what could be done differently. Yeah, what would be your reaction, and what could be done differently to ensure that this person is included? The floor is open. Just 1 minute.
So colleagues, anybody wants to take the floor or write your question or comment on the chat? Glay, there is no raised hands and no comments for the moment.
All right.
We can still give a few. Okay, now yes, there's one. Sorry.
Okay.
So we have Project Calmness. Propose that the interview can be done in written form. Give the candidate time. Another comment, I will give more time for this candidate to express himself. Anybody else? Somebody agrees with Orphe's comment about Project Calmness, propose that the interview can be done in writing. For the first situation, another comment, maybe ask if the interview will be comfortable to do the interview in writing.
Okay, I think those are okay. Let us move on in the interest of time. Colleagues, my name is Blair Houston Appleton, and I was asked to come and give you my story of what has happened with me, with my form of disability, and perhaps we could learn a few things from my story. Now, the first thing is that I'm a stutterer, and stuttering, well, it is caused, well, some instances are caused by health problems, accidents, or so. But in my case, I learned stuttering from my mother, and I've lived with it for the last 40 years. And there are factors, situations that would trigger how severe it would be. There are times in the morning I wake up, and that entire day there is no speech completely. Even with my kids, absolutely no speech. No matter how hard I try, it will not just come. And then as a child, I grew up in an extremely exclusive environment where there was less opportunities to engage, and that had an impact on me. Now that I am speaking to you is because I've lived with this for 40 years. So I have learned some tricks here and there. But even now, there are times when it is just almost impossible. I am sure on this call there are those of you that I have acted with, and you may have known it is about me. Okay, and so my friends were small group, of friends as I grew up, but there were certain circumstances in my life that gave me a kind of view. First is that by age 6, I lost my mom, and then by age 10, I lost my dad, and I was born and I grew up in a time in my country's history that was critical. By age 12, I was almost recruited as a child soldier. And then through that period, I experienced some heinous things. I saw murders firsthand, and how cruel the world can be. Now, bear in mind that I grew up as a special person. All right, yeah, I mean, just special. And all of these things created two views in my mind. Now, why am I saying all of these? That behind every situation, there's a story. And as recruiters or as people, it is important that we try to situate uh, the uh, the context to better understand how to live with these circumstances. So the first view that I grew up with is that the world is wicked, and that gave me a deep sense of apprehension in almost everything. If you heard what Heba was just saying, that is true. I grew up very apprehensive because of the perception around me that I am this person that is special, or this person that is disabled, or this person that has limitations, or this person that should not be included in this or that. And then, but it also told me that no one cared. Okay. And so I had to push harder. Throughout my entire life, I had to push harder. But now that I have gone through life and have experienced, it has a third view has been added. Is a view of hope. Okay, that it can change, but it can change only if we are deliberate about it. Now, I've spent the last 18 years, 18 years of my life, of my work life in the UN. Okay, and I've held all forms of contracts: SC, GS, National Professional, UNV, P, and all forms of contracts I've held. And I have experienced all forms of discrimination, prejudices, every form. I have gone through it. There's a time when two big two big bosses were fighting as a P5 and a D2. But because I was serving between them both, I suffered a lot, great lot, under suspicions. Okay, but these things happen. Now, in my work life, I've been viewed as too many things. One is with shock, as you have all heard from Heba and the answers that we have had from the colleagues. Shock. I enter an interview, and I've sat more than 2,000 interviews. So I enter an interview, I'm asked this question, and I start talking, and it is a complete shock. Complete shock. I can see the expressions on the faces of the panelists, and they are in absolute dismay, sometimes disarray at what do we do? How do we recollect ourselves as quickly as we can? This person, and then I've seen cases where they try to water down the questions for me, and I will challenge that. I don't want the questions to be watered down for me, because I don't want to be labeled as the other. I want to be included. I want to go through a competitive process. All I ask for is accommodation, as you all have just said, the time span. So, but do not try to rephrase the question in a way that makes it, a bit sim. It is not my understanding. No, it is not. And my way of speaking has got nothing to do with that at all. I've been in cases where I've been bullied. All right, even in the workplace, in the UN, I've seen cases where my colleagues have tried to make decisions for me. Now, I would just give a small case, and then I come to the recruitment process. I have seen what on this post, I have been on it for the last 2 years, but I have never been called upon to chair, to chair some meetings. And if my colleague Karin is listening, I'm sure she knows what I am talking about. Now, I have not, cared, but I see that my colleagues are trying to say, well, if we ask this guy to lead this meeting, it will embarrass him, and so on and so forth. But that decision is not yours. It's mine. That's one and two. By making that decision for me, you are excluding me. Okay. It is a form of exclusion. I want to be included because I'm a clean professional. I've worked in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Syria, in Lesotho, in Uganda, in Ethiopia. I've served as a technical advisor and all of these things. So don't make that decision for me. Now, however, all of these contexts that I've explained, there is something so unique that happened to me on this post during the recruitment process. I was invited for the written test, and I advanced to the interview. But during the application process, there's this question that says, is there a reasonable consideration? And I say yes. But no one came back to me to ask me what that was. However, during the time of the interview, I was sent 3 questions, and I was asked to record myself speaking. And in response to these 3 questions, and then I did that as the part 1 of the interview. And then I was invited to the second part of the interview, and to my dismay or my amazement or so, it was a rating interview, like many of you have said, and it was on Teams. So I was asked the question verbally, and I was told to respond in writing. Now, that was my first time. Imagine, I've sat more than 2,000 interviews and multiple institutions around the world, especially in the development space. Okay, but never has there been a thought. So that was a very brilliant experience, and that made a mark on my thought. Now, having gone through these last 40 years and experiences that I've had, there are three things that stand out the most from my experience that I thought we could learn from, that I coined the anthropology of disability, the social interaction, the relationship, the mindset. The first is the social construct that is built around the whole thing about disability. It is the perception and the framing of limitation. Now, but that also presents an opportunity that we need to tap into. As we engage in recruitment or in the workplace, the first thing we have to start doing is to reframe this entire discourse around disability. We have to reframe it completely. And it has to start from the perception that we have, all right? That people are diverse, and diversity is not just about culture, it's also about skill sets. Okay, we are diverse. We work in a diverse environment. And then two is the whole thing about strengths and weaknesses. Every living person carries strength and weakness. If we begin to reframe and perceive this as perhaps a strength and weakness, it simplifies it all. Okay, and then there's this whole discussion around competence. I have been in a team where when I present, the response that I get back is, "Glad you are not there yet." Well, because I have stuttered. But the substance of what I have presented did not matter. But what the feedback I got was that I stuttered so terribly that even my message was discorded. But I know that the substance that I presented had value. But the feedback is, "Claire, you are not there yet." Well, it's okay. We all are learning. So the whole framing of competence, we live in a world where everybody wants to talk. Everybody keeps talking. Everybody talks and they want to hear themselves talking. And you are in the room, and in 5 minutes, you can say only one word. And in 5 minutes, a person can read an entire book. Especially in the system now, everybody keeps talking. So competence, that whole reframing of competence. And then again on reframing is the whole thought of impairment. Impairment is the condition that the person who is disabled has. But the whole concept of disability is a perception. And that perception, we have linked it with limitations. So much so that we start to make decisions for those that we perceive to be limited. And that really, really hurts. Being honest, folks, you are in a team, you see that you are competent, but you raise your hand to say something and you are skipped many times. But you have said something also, and it does not matter because you said it in 5 minutes. But the other person has just said something that is closer to you, and that person's view is recognized. So these kinds of things happen. And then the second thing that I've seen is the whole interconnection, the whole social engagement with each other. The environment that we create is an environment of shock, an environment of sympathy, of pity, of fear, of apprehension and attempting to lower the challenge. No way. I don't want to work in an environment where my colleagues are perceived to be better than me. No way. I will resign. I will leave. I want to be challenged. I don't want you to throw things at me because you think, I am just there. No. Okay. So this whole recognition of skill sets is important. And the last thing is this whole thing of I don't know how I enter an interview and I start to start badly, and it becomes a shock when the fact that as long as the human race has existed, disability has existed. So how come me entering the room and I'm asked a question and I start to stutter and it becomes a complete shock and disarray? Did we not anticipate that? So we must design with foresight, design for inclusion with purpose, and that is what is lacking. We are designing with exclusion. Okay, so the foresight to anticipate the needs that we live in a diverse environment. So, colleagues, I'll stop here. Time is not on our side. I hope my story has inspired you. Well, today I am speaking, a bit better. That is because I've lived with stuttering for 40 years, and I have done everything I can in my strength. I've gone to therapies. I've gone everywhere to make sure that I can address this. But there are millions of others who do not have the opportunity that I have, that are left behind. And if we look at L and B, I think they are at the very tail end of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Glay. So here we have some comments on the chat. So let me just read. Okay, okay, let me go here. No, sorry, I thought they were putting comments. Basically, no. Thank you for sharing, Glay. There's also somebody who said it's important to think about our bias to work in these processes too. Okay, and that you were very inspiring. So yes, so thank you. Thank you for sharing. I've been working for you for the past, I think, 2-3 years, and well, didn't know all those details, and well, glad that we've been working together. And to tell you the truth, I don't see really, and I've been working with Heba as well. I mean, you get a point, when you don't see the disability, you're able to work very well with colleagues. And I think that's also something, as somebody was mentioning before, we have to, we have to think about our bias, okay, in these processes as well. So back to you, Heba. Let me just share again my screen. I don't know if you want to comment something, Heba, before I share my screen. And Glay, can you stop sharing yours, please? There. Okay, so I'll share again. And over to you, Heba.
Thank you very much, Karine, and thank you very much, Glay. It was really very inspiring and very informative and insightful. And I want to add that this feeling of shock and this feeling of that people focus more on limitations is not only experienced by person who has a speech impairment, but by different persons with disabilities. So people tend to focus on our limitations other than our capabilities. And there's something else. You have to build trust between you and the employee in order for the employee to be able to perform. So, for instance, I have a visual impairment. There are certain visual tasks that I would be not very comfortable doing, but because of these tasks, sometimes when I worked in previous organizations, um, my team leaders did not grasp the fact that I could learn how to work around these visual challenges. So whenever I have done an error in something, they still think that I will do this error all throughout all my working life. I have to do a lot of convincing for them to realize that I'm a person who is a self-learner, who want to be proactive and want to excel and increase my skills and improve my skills. So whenever I'm asking, how can I improve this skill? What can I do to make it better? The answer would be, don't worry about it. We will always have someone to support you. Yes, it's very good to have someone to support me, but I want to know how to do it myself. I want to be as independent as possible inside my workplace. So if we can go to the slide about interviewing a person with visual impairment, Karen, please let me know if you can access this slide.
Okay, let me move. I'm currently in the one that says equitable work conditions, so let me go to that one. Can you repeat which slide? I'm going on the onboarding one, equitable work conditions, job announcements.
Oh, okay. So maybe I have hidden it because I was mindful of the time, because I wanted to give Gray all the time that he needs in order to deliver his message. But let me say this. Imagine if you are in a scenario, you are in an HR personnel, and there's someone with visual impairment in the lobby waiting to come upstairs to participate in the interview. And you are asked to guide this person to the interview room. What is the first thing that would come to your mind? Would it be awkward? Would it be shock? Would it be you would be feeling a little bit confused on what you should do? What kind of feeling you're going to be experiencing? You can, of course, type in the chat if you have any comments.
Or if anybody wants to take the floor and quickly comment also, that's also possible. No one?
Okay, who have interacted with persons with visual impairments before? It's a yes or no question.
I have, but I mean, I'll let the colleagues answer. I did one, so I have here, for example, someone from UNOPS, Lydia Allen, and then there's another one who also says, I will feel ashamed to not know how to proceed. Okay, I think we're always scared of doing something wrong when interacting with persons with disability. And another colleague has also mentioned that, yes, she has also interacted with a person with visual impairment. Probably best to ask that person what they need, somebody else wrote.
Yes, yes, thank you. This is a magic word, to ask the person what they need before helping them. So whenever you will be in interaction with a person with visual impairment or with a disability in general, you would be feeling a little bit of discomfort and things would be a little awkward. But how can we overcome this kind of awkwardness? By having a good exposure, and that will not happen unless we employ more and more persons with disabilities. Because think flashback 100 years, when women were empowerment was still in its prime, and women were viewed as lesser beings who can just the only function that they can do is to stay at home, take care of the family, and that's it. They were not even allowed to be educated. So when a number of women pioneers took the lead and created the women or the gender equity movements, now we can see women leading on a lot of primes in many workplaces and organizations, both private and public. That didn't happen until there was a lot of exposure to having women empowered and giving the opportunity in order to work equally on an equal basis with other people, with men. So the same goes for persons with disability. We have to create the room for persons with disabilities to apply, and we have to empower them to apply for the different jobs so that they can thrive and they can create a change of mindset. I was in a training earlier today in one of the countries, and there were discussion about that there is a lot of institutional barriers that still exists in the United Nations. For example, in the UNOG, on the medical clearance from the HR office, sometimes prevents persons from with disabilities from having the medical clearance for them to be hired. But we can work together in order to change this and in order to advocate that persons with disabilities could and should have a little bit of leniency when it comes to the medical clearance policy, so that they can have a fair chance of being recruited in the job. So the we can go to the slide of the recommendations, if that's okay.
Okay, let me move to that one. Okay, so you have the onboarding, assessment, and evaluate recommendations there. So you're on the slide of
Yes.
recommendations. Before you
Okay.
go, before you go on,
Yeah.
sorry, I just wanted to read the comments here also in the chat, the new comments that came in. So someone said the first thing I did was to ask if they needed help and how I can help them before taking action. Another person said I will talk to the person and will lead them to the way. And then Glay commented, the magic is engage colleagues. You are all right. Engage is the key. When you engage, you increase your understanding of the needs and how you can support better. Fear furthers the exclusion.
Thank you very much, Karen, for sharing the comments, and thank you, colleagues, for your comments as well. Yes, it is very important to ask for the person's what the person needs before offering help. So I will share with you a story that I shared also in the previous webinar. I'm based in Alexandria in Egypt, so I was in my university years, and had to go to the university. One of my friends was due to pass by my place of residence to take me to the university, and the where I live was in the C Corniche, or it's like a highway. It's a very fast and very busy street with lots of cars. So I was standing on the right side of the road, waiting for my friend to come with her car and take me to the university. So there comes a person, a gentleman. He didn't ask whether I need help or not. He just started acting. He physically manipulated me, took my hand, grabbed my hand actually, and started helping me to pass over to the other side of the road, which took us like 5 minutes or more. So I was trying to tell the person, "Excuse me, I don't want to cross. I want to stay. This is my right side of the road," but he didn't listen. So I ended up being on the wrong side of the road, and I had to wait for 30 minutes for another person to pass by. And my friend was like calling me on the cell phones, trying to tell me, I'm here, I'm waiting for you. But because this person did something without asking, it cost me time. It cost me a lot of frustration, and it created a disabling condition and a disabling situation which I couldn't really interact with. So always ask the person if they need help. Second thing, do not try to ask, how can we help you better? Would you like me to take your arm? Would you like me to assist you to the door and all that? Do not assume that persons with disabilities always are in need of help, because this is actually not true. A lot of us are independent travelers, although we have a visual impairment. So do not assume that we need help. So to bring it back to context, when you are trying to create an inclusive workplace, these are some recommendations for you to take into account. In order to make your workplace more inclusive, hire for not only for competence but for potential as well. So when you see a person that may not have all the skill sets that you need in order to work for this job, but this person has a potential to learn, you give this person a chance, because this person will be more loyal to the organization when they are given a fair chance. Also, you can shift the focus from short-term reactive employment to a more permanent long-term contracting modality. Because when you have a permanent staff with a disability, he is going or she is going to work as an agent of change, and is going to change the mindset of the whole organization or the whole office he or she is working on. They're going to change their view of a person with a disability completely, because they will see this person on a daily basis working and excelling in their job, and being promoted and being recognized and appreciated. Invest in employee development, allocate budget for training, and this is very important for persons with disabilities. And as we said, we always try to develop a train track approach. So enroll persons with disabilities in the main training scheme of the organization, but develop a targeted trainings for a person with a disability in some skills that they might need, like, for example, leadership, interpersonal skills, self-assertiveness, self-esteem. Um, for me, I have a very negative working experience, because I worked for an organization for more than 20 years, and I was experiencing a lot of microaggression and subtle discrimination. So when I finally have the courage to leave this organization after working for it for 20 years, and I've started working in other organizations, I was traumatized. So till now, I don't really trust my performance very much. I always need encouragements, like, you're doing good, you're doing well, and I always need instruction, like, you need to improve this, you need to improve that. So you might find that persons with disabilities, although they have the necessary competencies and skills, and also they are very dedicated and motivated, they also need your support in terms of providing training which could accommodate for the skills that they need. Encourage and foster the employee value propositions. So always have encourage all the achievements and recognize them that are done by persons with disabilities. Ensure the accessibility of all your job announcement platform, your consultant roster, your project documents, your contracting documents, because, for example, most of the contracts are sent in PDF files. For users who are using screen reader, PDF files are a disaster when it comes to navigation and reading, especially if they are not designed correctly. So always have files in alternative format, and be sure to tune in to our upcoming webinar, where we'll be discussing inclusive digital content, how to create inclusive digital content. Next slide, please. Also, make sure to simplify application processes. When I was applying for a lot of jobs, you would find the application consists of 5 pages, 6 pages, 9 pages of information, and you would have to enter the information more than once. So when you're creating your personal profile, you would enter your education and your language skills. And then when you are sometime forward some pages in the application, you are asked to enter this information again. So be sure that when you're asking a question in the application, be sure to ask it only once, or if you even need to ask it twice, be sure to have something that would link up this question to the last occurrence, the previous occurrence of this question before it, so that users wouldn't have to type in the answers again. Also develop reasonable accommodation guidelines and mechanisms within your agency. And by the way, reasonable accommodation requests can not only be initiated by a person with a disability, but can be initiated by an HR personnel in consultation with the person with a disability, or a team leader in consultation with the person with a disability. Be sure to review this reasonable accommodation plan during the employment cycle of the person, because sometimes you would have a person who has a visual impairment. He has a still, or he or she has a little bit of vision, usable vision. So this person would need magnifying software that can magnify the computer screen. But as this vision limitation progresses, this person will not be able to use the magnification software, but will need a screen reader, which is like the one I'm using. So be sure to review this reasonable accommodation plan. You can remove key identifier from job applications that explains whether this person has a disability or this person requires reasonable accommodation, in order to ensure to eliminate any unconscious bias when during your selection processes. Using data-driven decision making really helps. Really, data analytics really help in your decision making processes in order to ensure its inclusivity. I would like to say something about the onboarding really quick, although it's not, we are not sharing this slide right now. You can be sure to, the onboarding phase is one of the very significant recruitment phase for persons with disabilities, not only because they are acquainted with the job knowledge of the job, but also they need to be acquainted with the office environment, physical and digital environment. They need to be get acquainted with the colleagues and be comfortable with interacting with the office colleagues. So number one, be sure to assess the inclusivity and accessibility of your mainstream software and physical environment as well. And be sure to have reasonable accommodations ready before the person joins in the workplace. For example, for me, it took me 5 months to get a laptop, and it took me 4 months to get a screen reader that I was using, or 3 months to get the screen reader that I'm using now to access the computer. So if the reasonable accommodation requests were implemented in place before I joined, this, of course, would greatly improve my job performance, especially at the beginning of my recruitment. Also, be sure to organize a pre-working day visit for a person with a disability to be familiar with the layout of the place, to make sure he or she can navigate the place. Provide a tactile representation, tactile map, explaining the different place layout, explaining the commonly used areas like the doctor's office or the toilets or the cafeteria or any other things, information that might be relevant. Make sure to ask the person and always assess the level of satisfaction that the person with a disability experience in your work environment, because this will positively affect their performance. And in the next slide, the next slides, I'm not going to go through them one by one, but they contain some examples of reasonable accommodations that you can find in the workplace. You can find information about the different software that is used by persons with visual impairments, like screen readers and screen magnifiers. You can also find hardware, which is also used by persons with visual impairment, like braille displays and braille printers and the CCTV magnifiers. And you can also find some assistive devices, listening devices that are used by persons with hearing impairments. And the end of the slide before last contains some additional videos and resources. I really encourage you to see the video entitled Sighted Guide Techniques for Persons with Visual Impairments, because it shows you how to guide a person with a visual impairment, how to walk together, and how to provide a good and appropriate sighted guide technique, to use sighted guide techniques. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for listening in and for tuning in in today's webinar. And please be sure to provide your feedback. I think we have a QR code that we have included in the presentation for you to to use to provide the feedback that for the presentation, because your feedback is really very important to us. So it's over from me, and over to you, Karen, for if we have any comments or questions.
Thank you, Heba. I went very quickly on the last slides, of the different reasonable accommodations. So sorry for the colleagues. I mean, if it went too fast while Heba was explaining, but you'll have the presentation. You will be able to go into it and look at more. I mean, slower and look into the data and the information. Please, your feedback. It's very important for us so we can see then what needs to be improved in our next webinars. And well, I don't know if you have any questions. I don't see hands raised. I don't see also questions. Oh, let me see. They're coming in. Yes, I mean, the recording will be available, okay, also, and I would believe, Heba, I'll check with my colleagues in New York, but I will believe this will be also posted in Yammer, right? Okay, so I think colleagues will also have the ability to go into Yammer and see the recordings from last week's sessions, this session, and the following. We have 10 sessions in all, okay, so please log into all the 10. It's every Friday for LAC. There's also sessions on Wednesday for other regions, but basically the ones for LAC and on the New York time zone, basically on this side, are being done on Friday. What else? Let me see. I'm reading here in the chat. I mean, there is here. Thank you much for the session. Thank you. Oops, they're coming in as I read, so sorry here. Thanks a lot, super informative and practical, just like last week's session. This is really true, and it is really the case. This is Glay answering a comment before above, but do not fear. Persons with disability really want to engage if you give the accommodation. Excellent. Thank you, Heba and Glay, for this inspiring session. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Glay, also for giving us your story. I think it's very inspiring, as well as Heba's. Okay, then. So I think just in time, we have 1 minute to go. If anybody has any other comment or wants to take the floor. If not, then thank you. Thank you for joining. Hope to see you next week as well. And have a nice weekend, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Heba and Glay. Big hug to you guys. Bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. Bye.